Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever part of the world you are in. Thank you so much for joining our Symbiotic Culture Lab as we're coming together to work together in building this symbiotic network.
Hello, everybody. The last meeting we had 2 weeks ago, I was in Bay Area working on my book. So the audio connection was just really thrashed. So I had done a share in the beginning part of this meeting, and it's not going to be a repeat because there's a lot more information in the last 2 weeks since we talked. So without further ado, I'm going to speak about what we call the Golden Rule 2.0. And the reason in this section for like 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of these meetings that we talk about these principles and values, which are in the realm of, I guess you would call it spirituality and development of character, is that's essential today in order for us to build really robust and deep community networks. In order to be a person who's capable of unifying a community, we have to unify within ourselves. And that means focusing on principles and values and sharing that with each other. Before I talk about Golden Rule 2.0, I'd want to share a recent experience. So my wife, Marta, and I went this week for 2 days, and we were at this amazing conference, and it was about the leaders, grassroots leaders in Oceania. And that includes Tahiti, Fiji, Marshall Islands, Papua New Guinea, Palau, Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii. And all these folks, about 100 leaders, were discussing what they were doing. It included a woman from Papua New Guinea who built a network of women farmers, 80,000 strong, a network of 80,000 women farmers. Really amazing, and many people just like that. What I felt, and my wife Marta as well, is that when these leaders were together, they related like what we envisioned to be a really amazing, beautiful family. It felt like one family. And I started reflecting on this, which is traditional peoples, such as we're in this conference, and even small towns in developed countries, they have a natural and organic ways of connecting, building family, tribe, neighborhood, and village connections. And one reason this is important to know is that we've lost a lot of this type of connection throughout the world. It's crowded out by commercialism and disconnection. I wanted to go back to the Golden Rule. As many of you know, the Golden Rule generally is stated as treat others as you would like to be treated. But in this kind of commercialized global society, that could still be transactional. So in other words, I'll help you only if I know you're going to help me in return. And that's kind of how the energy of the Golden Rule has kind of diminished. We're introducing something that we call Golden Rule 2.0. Now, it's not really new. It's just a reflection of some deeper principles that have gotten lost. So treat others as you would like to be treated, because we come from one source. We are one family, and I am you and you are me. And as the former president of Palau, who was at this conference, he extended this to nature. He actually said something that just to our normal sensibilities would seem odd. He said, I am the river is me. And I thought about in my life, after being with these amazing human beings, that the Golden Rule 2.0 is really alive, but its power seems to be drowned out by the world. So we call that power intentional mutual benefit. We call it symbiotic or mutualism. In Hawaii and other Pacific Islands, they call it aloha. When I was doing community work in a low-income, multi-ethnic, mostly Hispanic neighborhood in San Diego, it was called convivir, to share your life. And then, of course, you guys, we've talked about Sarvodaya in Sri Lanka. From a Southeast Asian and Buddhist perspective, they call it Sarvodaya. And then, of course, many of you in the Judeo-Christian world, we call it agape, or unconditional love, in all our relations. And then Dr. Martin Luther King called it the beloved community. So these aren't new ideas. It's really important to realize that even though we're calling it something new, it's just to draw attention to the importance of this principle and these values in building community. And I'd like to close by sharing really a confirmation of how we go about using this energy and these principles to build networks. A Dr. Tusi, who's this amazing human being, he's professor, he's a business leader, but he's also an elder from Samoa. And he said, and I'm going to quote this, so I'm going to have to like read it. And this will strike everybody as really interesting what he actually said about collaboration. He goes, by meeting with key stakeholders one by one, the leader gains a sense of who each person is and begins to build a foundation of mutual trust and respect that will be necessary for working well together in the future. On an energy level, it involves gathering and channeling each person's internal spiritual power and then dispersing that energy so that the group is imbued with respect and aloha. Only then are participants truly ready to collaborate. When this transformation happens, productive thinking and a sense of wholeness are likely to follow. And I'm telling you, this is a real deal. This is really happening. And in that group of 100 leaders from multiple countries, they had built this relations with each other about the work, about their being part of nature, part of the Pacific Islander, part of, their own land, part of this bigger principle. And you could see it, you could feel it there. I was just so amazed, and I felt like I could really connect with that energy. And the fact that Dr. Tusi, this Samoan elder, is literally describing a collaboration process in the business of developing community networks that's really identical to what we've been describing in how you build symbiotic networks, such as a local food system network. And that was confirmation to me that we're really on the right track. There's some fundamental principle that is missing from a lot of community business network development, that kind of thing. And I so appreciate that we really are building that together. Even though right now we're distributed around the world, we're cultivating this within ourselves as we're involving ourselves in our own region. Anyway, thank you for letting me share that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Richard. So this is a time of contemplation, the time to share where you've had an experience of how you were able to demonstrate this principle and or see it. And as I'm hearing you talk, Richard, that feeling it in action. What comes to mind is, for me personally, is this place of where volunteer and get with organizations and help. And I remember at one point, going and meeting. In the very first meeting, it was even just that simple question of, why are you here and how can we help you? And what do you want to get out of it? And so it was really beautiful, this sense of community, because we all came there for a mission of raising money and helping this cause. But the way that the meeting was facilitated and the way that everybody had their voice and we got to hear kind of what they wanted from it. I got to see the team really come together and have that sense of it. Not only were we helping this cause, but we were all helping each other accomplish this beautiful goal. And I know this particular event, they broke records with sponsorship and fundraising. And I attribute to it to the beautiful, caring about everybody that came together in that container, in addition to the vision. Is that kind of what you're thinking about, Richard? If I was to share an experience, would that be one that you were looking for?
Yeah, I think so, because it shifts our perspective from trying to get something out of it for ourselves. Like, that's just been drilled into us. That's normal. That's like normal reality. But what I experienced, and Marta and I experienced at this conference, there's another way of experiencing and working in this world. We got a lot of confirmation that it's happening. It's just, we need to cultivate it. I guess the one experience I wanted to share was that we were at a table at one point, a breakout table, and this particular day was on it was breadfruit conference. So it was all about the breadfruit and the diet. What was really interesting, we ended up at a table with 25 to 35-year-old youth, indigenous leaders. And even though, I had the idea of, sharing about what we're doing, about building a symbiotic network, for example, in Oahu and also on the Big Island, because a number of those youth were from the Big Island. It just all shifted where I felt like instead of me trying to get them to do what I would like them to do, I shifted it to, wow, I just really looking for this opportunity to support what you guys are already doing and support you rather than have you do my thing. It just is a shift that we're continually challenged with. So this is not an easy question. I mean, what we're talking about right now is we're probably like fish that don't know they're in water. So we're having to cultivate these qualities so that we can be more effective in building community networks. So anyway, that was my sharing. Did you want to go into breakouts?
Yes,
now,
that'd be great. And so in the breakouts, this is a sacred space. It's not going to be recorded. We'll pause this for a minute and it doesn't record the breakouts. And so this is the kind of sharing where, where we're practicing going in our heart. We're looking at some of these principles and how they're implemented in our world. It's not necessarily, definitely not a time to be talking about business or pitching business. We want to know your name and really not so much getting into a discussion, but just sharing your experience of how you were able to demonstrate this principle and or see this principle in action. We're going to have 2 minutes each. So when you get in the room, there's just a few of you in the room, say your name, pick a timekeeper. I have Richard, I have you in a group, March in a group, and Debbie is a kind of a leader to help facilitate and keep it moving. And then we'll see you back here in just a few moments for an hearing some of the ahas. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Would love to take a moment of any shares. Anybody learned something new or any deeper connection they had? Anybody want to share about this experience for a moment? Okay. Amanda, I can see your, okay, go ahead.
I'll take a stab and share. So my share was not specifically about sharing in food specifically, but sharing in local connections and getting people connected with where they need to be so they can continue with what they do ultimately, which allows them to make money, which allows them to afford food. So, just that connecting of people when I don't have a horse in the game or in the race.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Well, my big 2.0 is Richard and Shannon, watching the two of you pull all this together and just give of your time and your energy and your thoughts. And I know there's a lot going on behind that we don't see. And I just want to honor you and how you're sharing that 2.0. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Debbie. All right, anybody else want to share before we get into our fun agenda? Okay. Well,
can I share something?
Yes.
And it looks like Eva's got his hand. What's attracted me, what I said on the little breakout, what really attracted me, obviously, I'm a master gardener. I garden. Food sustainability is important to me, very important, especially now. But the integration somehow of the Americans that are participating in restoring our actual legitimate government and the incredible strides and successes that we've had up to this point, and what you guys are doing and we're all going to be doing, it's just ready to marry. I think it's important that each one of you have an understanding of what that whole restoration thing is, because it affects us at the 2.0 level. All the ramifications of how we operate and do life and everything are impacted by what's been happening there and what's happened very recently, right? In terms of staving off a worldwide financial collapse. Right. And that was done by the folks in our federation.
So I'm going to chime in here real quick, Anthony. I know that you have so much really powerful information, and I want to make sure that would love to connect and look at the channels to share that, and want to just make sure that we keep this part on that, because I believe you have stuff to be able to share, but I also know that we have a full agenda, and we also got to
I yield
that fine line.
I would like, if it's okay, Shannon, is okay that I just make a brief comment? So that's like a rabbit hole that we could go down and spend a long time on. I just want to let you know, Anthony, that I've been really sensitive to that I'm talking maybe 40 years, and seeing it more and more. What we're doing in our approach, I believe, at least addresses some aspect of this kind of global system meltdown that we're seeing by getting people like us to step up, unify not just people, individuals in our local regions, but organizations, all nonprofits, local business, even local government, to all pitch in to start building the capacity, especially with building these food system networks, so that we can grow more food, consume more food locally, and we could become self-reliant. As I've said multiple times, Hawaii as a state is importing 90% of its food. And what was so interesting is that there's a kind of a sense that, we have to depend on more formal sources, institutional sources. So what we're discussing this morning is how do we encourage this natural capacity of human beings to collaborate, to share this 2.0. It's not new because it obviously is happening in that conference and in the Pacific. It's how do we create greater coherence? How do we go to the next level of local community organization, independent of institutions, and yet involving them, but independent? And that requires building what could be called a parallel set of society, a parallel society in a sense. So a commitment, a coherent commitment to coming together around these principles, but in action. It's not about philosophy, it's about embodiment. And it's about helping each other, supporting each other in this journey. That's why we call this Symbiotic Culture Lab as a laboratory, in that we're connecting on these calls. It's not just about, what we just shared in terms of philosophy. It's literally about practitioners who are stepping up, who are expanding their capacity to build resilience, self-sufficiency, and sovereignty. Anyway, okay, that was a lot. That wasn't a quick response. Sorry, but I do appreciate what you said, Anthony. Anybody else have any remarks from the small group?
Kiva.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at things that seem similar. Like in the Avatar movie, they're on the planet and they have these connections under the ground between the forest. And it's like we as the people on the planet are the connectors of what's going to change. So it's like us going out and really connecting with each other and connecting with other people is really creating those connections. Because you have mentioned how much separation there's been through COVID, how much separation there's been through even, just by getting on the internet and all the whole process. Like I hate my phone because, like everyone wants to text or email or do this thing, and I'd rather talk to someone. And that idea of, just connecting, there's so much more in connection that's transferred and understood, and you're trying to build trust. How do you build trust? By emailing people. Like really. Yeah. So the Avatar movie has this connection under the forest, which makes the forest one. And, you're trying to make that oneness a reality. Well, it all makes sense to me. I'm done.
Richard, anything else on this segment?
No, I'm just really happy that we could go deeper in these calls. And I'm glad that we actually got this recording about 2.0, because 2 weeks ago, we had all that audio challenge, or at least on my end. So I'm happy to meet some new folks also. So let's transition to the next part of the agenda.
So now we're going to get into the teaching and the collaborating. We divided these into a couple sections. The first piece that we're going to talk about is a neighbor for neighbors. I know some of you may have watched the recording and wondering, where is that toolbox? Let me put that in the chat right now. And as you're on this journey with us, we are creating tools, updating tools, but this is the tool chest of all of the flyer, the manual, the step-by-step with the neighbor for neighbor. And so we wanted to open it up. Is there anybody that has any celebrations or any questions about the neighbor for neighbor connecting that they may be doing? And actually, Richard, I think you're going to do some updates first, right?
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, I just wanted to share with everybody, and actually it's related to neighbor for neighbor. So far, I think we have more activity happening in the US within Florida, work's happening in New York and other others in the US, and what Marta and I are involved here in Oahu. I had an interesting call with a group of crypto guys, which is, I guess, what they were in Austria, in a rural part of Austria, south of Vienna. And they've got some land and they're building an ongoing eco village there, but want to connect to the broader community. And they're in a region which is pretty mountainous. So it's really interesting how this is spreading. So that's more on the food system. On a neighbor kind of update, had a connection. It's actually through Twitter with a gentleman who's in South Africa. He's on near the coast in South Africa, and he's in a rural region where there's 80% of the people are of a particular tribe and speak that language. And he lives in a village and he's a farmer, but he started his first process to do a gathering on the street in his village. And he was talking about, he's in an area of hundreds of villages. So we were discussing some of the challenges of how to spread this idea of being a neighbor connector in hundreds of rural villages in Africa, especially if he didn't speak the language. So we started talking about how he's building relationships with some of the folks from that tribe, within his neighborhood, and really interesting. The dynamics are so different than, say, Europe or the US in terms of their society, but the principles that we're sharing seem to be universal and are holding up. So that was some news of what's going on from what I've heard that's new, and hopefully those folks will be joining us in the next calls. Before we transition to talking about the food system network, I want to kind of frame why building a neighbor network and how that's related to a food system network. As you know, Symbiotic Culture Lab, we work in 12 sectors in a community, and that includes food and water, energy, housing, education, but it includes neighbor to neighbor. If you think about it, we're talking about what are the actions an individual can do to build community. Well, there's the level of themselves, and then we give opportunities for people to organize and build a symbiotic neighborhood, and then extending beyond that, like we did in Reno, Nevada, back in 2007 through 2012, is we built a neighbor network of 100 streets within the region, and that creates a neighbor to neighbor network. The reason that's related to these other sectors like food is that people started sharing food on a street level. So what emerges are backyard farming initiatives, and then it can become a network of backyard farmers. So these things are all interrelated, but they're coherent, they're specific, project oriented, because you can't do everything all at once. But if you had enough connectors connecting in each of these sectors, so we're looking for 12 connectors in a region who would be like, Shannon and Debbie in their county, for example, who would hold space to connect the thousands of businesses and organizations. That's as simple as it gets. It might be simple in concept, but it takes this, expanded awareness. And like we discussed last time, the ability and capacity for each of us as people to hold space for larger and larger collectives, whether it's neighborhood, then your bioregion. And that's pretty much how we are developing this process and our strategy.
Now we're going to move into the food system network. And this is where Richard, I think you're going to talk a little bit about where we've been and where we're going, but we are going to open this up for updates and celebrations also.
Absolutely. So what I would like to do is, in this part of the agenda, is reinforce where we've come in this journey of building what's called a local food system network, which is a way of identifying, mapping all leaders of nonprofits, for-profits, local government, any organization or business or agency that is related to the food system, and connecting them to eventually have it become a strong marketplace of connectivity and support, so that the goal of growing more food and consuming more food becomes an incremental developing strategy. We started this process by identifying and mapping who are the existing players in the region that you live. So we generally are focusing on the area of a county in the US. So we have municipality, then county. Generally, a county would be big enough to be able to have enough diversity of players to start connecting. So we went through the process in the previous videos, in the trainings, to describe how to start mapping your system. So then we described in the last video, which we had some audio challenges, is the next step. Once you've mapped out your food system to the best you can, then the next step is identifying individual leaders in that food system who you can start to meet. So then this is the new phase, which is having face-to-face meetings with individuals. As you remember from what I shared this morning about the Samoan leader, Dr. Tusi, who has a process from Polynesian culture, talking about building the basic collaboration, which is perfectly in alignment with this, which is you build individual personal relationships face-to-face first before you call your first meeting. This process of identifying, mapping your ecosystem to having your first meetings could take between 30 and 60 days. So right now, both Shannon and myself, we've had some initial meetings. Shannon in Brevard County, Florida, and myself here in Oahu, Hawaii. So I wanted to describe the first meeting as part of the training. So this is the second step in this process after mapping your ecosystem. I wanted to just describe an experience I had with the director of the Hawaii Food Bank. The first third of the meeting, it's important that it's not about, initially, it's not about promoting the idea of a food system. Okay, that's paradoxical, right? It's actually about finding out what they're doing. So this is part of Golden Rule 2.0. You're practicing an action, but you're not immediately coming to sell the idea of a local food system network. What you're doing is you're finding out what's important to them. So I was able to get a tour of the food bank and learn about their operations. For me, it was meaningful because I was a former director of the San Diego Food Bank in the late 90s. So I had a lot of connections to that part of the food system. And it was really amazing to see what they were doing. And people generally are excited about talking about what they're doing. That's why the first third of the meeting, your first face-to-face meeting, is all about the person that you're sitting with or people. The second part of the meeting is about challenges. So then you shift gently when it's appropriate to shift, and you start talking and asking questions of the leaders that you're meeting. You ask them, what are some of the challenges you've seen in building a robust local food system network? Now, some of the answers you might get would be, for example, in Hawaii, they're throwing out more than 100 million pounds of food a year annually. That's a problem. So I'm listening to that. The other was a description of how people and organizations are in silos. They're competing with each other, which is part of the reason to do what we're doing. Anyway, after listening to these challenges, then the last part of the meeting is then exploring the opportunities of building a local food system network, which could address many of these issues. And just as a follow-up to share with you how this works, was so interesting. After the meeting with the food bank director, organically, I made another connection with a gentleman that is launching one of the largest commercial composting operations in Hawaii. And it happens to be here on Oahu. And then at this conference that Marta and I were at, we met another person who's launching a similar kind of vehicle, which is being able to take some of this food waste and convert it to other kinds of directions, developing, biofuels. People use a lot of propane here. There's kerosene. Anyway, there's ways of creating alternatives for that, as well as taking some of this food and converting it to compost. So here, literally within a week or so, we started seeing how these organic connections are bubbling up, but you don't do anything with it yet. You just notice and observe. So that's the sharing about this next phase, the second phase of building a local food system network, which is starting to meet people individually. And I'll turn it over to you, Shannon.
Yeah, so I want to be able to share this piece. And Richard, I have to say, one of the things that I think I was sharing with Kiva the other day, or maybe it was Anthony, that I really like about your skill set and what you're doing is the ability to understand that we all have different things going on. And that's kind of what you're showing in this initial meet and greet. It's like every area has certain gaps or challenges, and then each business has their individual challenge. And what I love, Richard, is you have the ability, much like you did with Amanda, showing up and going, okay, Amanda, you live in an area that's different than Brevard County, and that gift. So thank you so much for showing up for each of us in our own individual things. And so when I had my first meeting, well, let me just back up for a minute. The other piece that I love about this process is, I don't know about you guys, but I worked with this really successful man, and he always said, find somebody who has what you want, do what they do, and you'll get what they've got, right? And so in my brain, I've always been, I don't have to reinvent the wheel, find somebody who's done it and just duplicate it. And so as much as being a promoter, I want to get out there and start sharing this, what we're doing, your system of mapping, identifying, and really not, like there's a whole process here. I have to say it's been challenging at times because I like to talk and meet people, but also I'm seeing the benefit, and I'm also seeing that place where, much like you said, where there's the connections that happen naturally. So I was eager for last session, we went over the script, and I love the introduction. So I met with a woman here where I identified one of the things that I heard was, we want to identify that somebody that has a like mind, that they're not operating from ego, that they want to have a place of building community, that they are looking to, not just grow their business, but really make a work within their community. So this woman was just totally embodied that place of, she tried to do a food association, and when COVID happened, she brought all these chefs together to share ways to pivot, and her whole heart is into really helping restaurants here locally, and she only shops at local farms, and it was really amazing. So when we got together, first off, I felt honored because she's an award-winning global chef that gets flown all over the world, and you kind of wonder, I was like, does she even have time for this type of stuff? But she identified problems in our area that I didn't even think of, things, obviously we know ego and people working together, but she also talked about consumer education. She got to, I got to hear what's happening in our area, because I'm not in the food space of what's going on. And I have to tell you, she was so excited about the idea of first off, this, what Richard's done in this proven path, but to have people that come together with that shared vision, because you could tell that she was feeling alone. Like, she's like, I've got this inside of me, I want to do this, being alone and not really having the structure of success. And the reason I'm saying that is we've met on this journey, I know just in the last few months, people that are doing similar things, but they might be missing a part of the process. Right, Richard, have you identified, where it's like, I happen to be on a call and it's like, well, did you do this? Right. And just asking the question. And so,
there's multiple levels to this that collectively that I've learned, over the years, that are, necessary ingredients. You can't just take a piece of it and graft it onto something else. You'll just end up with something that's not going to lead to this full system network.
Yeah, so I'm so grateful that that you showed this process, because I feel like I've identified one, possibly two of those initial people, right? It was really, I think a big success.
Do you think, can I ask you a question about that?
Yes, please.
What were some of the challenges and the opportunities that this restaurateur had? I think you'd mentioned something. They've been trying for a while, or had a vision to build. I think one was a community kitchen.
Yep.
That was one thing. And there was something else. I can't remember, what was the other
I'm
one?
pulling up the thing real quick, the notes. So yeah, she part of her seeing to be able to help the individuals with what's happening right now is coming up with a community hub, a food hub, where we can, she was looking at an old kind of part of a mall, and she wanted to be able to have this as a place of many chefs can rent, so they don't have that big overhead. Yeah. They can share the farming. The other thing is the whole farming. We don't have community buys. We don't have group buys. So she has a lot of ideas that she hasn't been able to implement, that she sees a food network as a possibility of doing that. Did I answer your question?
You did. And I just wanted to make a comment to create a context for what's happening. So what's happening is without knowing it, we're like fish in water that don't know they're in water. We're in a culture of separation. So this restaurateur had these amazing ideas, but because she is emerging within this culture of separation and competition and individuals only, it never occurred to her that there could be a network that could lift all boats, including the project she wants to build. So she's still doing it, like many of us, on an individual or on an individual restaurant basis. Like, she's trying to build this community kitchen herself through her own network, through her own restaurant. She's trying to build this food hub, again, on her own. So I think, Shannon, you were able to share with her how in building, if she was part of helping just simply to build this larger context, this larger, construct where all the food system players are together in one place. And imagine if you had 100 leaders meeting at that first public meeting where she put into the space, hey, everybody, I've been really wanting to build this community kitchen or this food hub. So what I've seen happen is the following. Somebody might be there from some organization, development, maybe even the government. Somebody might say, wow, that's a great idea. I've got a building you could use. Somebody could say, well, I've got capital. I've got resources that I could contribute to that project. So the network, the food system network, doesn't build a community kitchen or a community garden or a food hub in a physical location. It's a catalyst to bring together people in spite of ourselves and our, ego nature, which drives us to be separate. It brings us all together in this new context that lifts all boats. It supports all brands, and that's where the magic happens. So this is the transition that, Shannon's now engaging in that. It's an organic process. I'll give you another example of this. So, Marta and I are building both our neighbor network here in Oahu and local food system network. So we've been meeting, I've been doing the mapping. I started to do some meetings, and that last meeting was really amazing at the conference with 100 leaders there, many from throughout the state of Hawaii. And at my table, again, I'll bring up these youth that were just amazing. So this young woman next to me, a Hawaiian proud person into Hawaiian sovereignty and speaks the language and was teaching Marta and I more about the Hawaiian culture. It was amazing. She has a food forest in her backyard. So while I am looking at this bigger macro food system, I'm thinking to myself, wow, here's a connection who's already connected to the local, indigenous community, the native community, as well as youth, as well as, Web 3.0, all those things happen. So what we're going to do is connect with her simply, go check out her food forest and look at it and see how we can support her. And one thing that came up at our table was this: a subset of a food system network is what's called a backyard farming network. So there's all these subcomponents of a food system. There's like farm to table, where you have programs where farmers are selling directly to restaurateurs. You have food hubs where farmers distribute food into a hub, and then restaurateurs, grocers, and others, farmers markets folks, do that on an ongoing basis. Another subsector is what I said, a backyard farming network. And I was part of something like that in Reno. And in Oahu alone, there could be 10,000 backyard farmers. So I'm excited about the potential of exploring an avenue I did not even consider. This is not just a science, this is an art, and you have to be open and flexible to serve. And the irony of this is, if this young woman develops a network of backyard farmers within Oahu, after it happens, they will not know that I even exist. I want you to consider this. This is part of the work. In order to be successful, at the end of the day, the network that you help to catalyze need to say, we did this ourselves. For our egos and our desire to be dominant, desire to be, number one, that's like a sacrifice for most people when they think about it that way. On the other hand, having that perspective that we have as a catalytic connector, it's important to understand what our role is. Our role is to encourage the natural capacity of a community to empower itself. In order for this to scale, in order for this to become fractal and spread around the planet into thousands of communities, we need to be able to teach people to teach fishing up and down the chain. And that way it can be healthy and it could organically emerge finally without any outside control or extraction. And that's why this feels different than normal community development, even building a business network like a chamber or something. This is radically different. The perspectives are radically different. I hope that was helpful.
Absolutely. Anthony's like, yay.
Shannon, do you have another story? I mean, we don't necessarily have to say which governmental agency, but that was interesting. You met with a multi-county agency.
Yeah, and I have to say that's been another part of this journey that's been so amazing is like once you're like, okay, I'm doing this thing, things just start showing up. And so I went to a conference, and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council was the very first person I talked to, and said that they actually did a food system analysis in specific counties, but they actually did a full assessment and report and beyond the mapping that we do here. Like we identified, map, they had all of that, and then also did a high level, what are some of the challenges and obstacles that they see over the next decade. And we had the chance, Richard and I met with them, and it was very fascinating. The first part for me, Richard, that I was blown away with is that they basically did this report for like a $600,000 grant, and it kind of sits in a drawer. They report it to the counties, but it's not put into action. And so you could tell they were kind of excited that it could be put into action. Richard, did I interpret that correctly? Is that kind of your interpretation?
It's a universal phenomenon of local governments that have the same interests that we do to build food systems. They get these funds from federal or state level, and they do a lot of work. They spend a year developing it. They bring players together like we're doing, but then they run out of money, and the paid staff of the government then works on something else. It happened in Hawaii 20 years ago. They had a 100-page summary of how in the year 2000, by 2020, Hawaii would be food self-sufficient. It's really interesting. So we have to know this kind of institutional reality and the constraints on it. They can't do what we're doing, and what we're doing doesn't cost any money on the ground. It's simply building these network of new relationships and solidifying the old relationships. And it's like building a parallel society. That's our strategy. And it's really interesting to see. Any other comments about that meeting?
Yeah, and it was beautiful. They have to get permission to ask some of it, but I'm excited because I feel like it's done a lot of work. There's things that we have that they could probably use, and vice versa. And they also shared challenges, much like Richard was saying, when we do this first get together, you ask for challenges. They identified challenges that I didn't even think of. So each meeting really learning where some of those gaps are, but just seeing this as a whole as we're building this as being a great solution. So excited. And we may actually have a representative that's, there was a piece of them where they're passionate about the food, and they see this need. And so hoping we can have one not only share the information, but get involved in what we're doing and make those connections.
Yeah, and something to comment about, while this symbiotic culture networks and community building, it's driven by peers, by leaders and others connecting directly. It's not led by government. Governments themselves at any scale don't know how to do this. They don't know how to do this. In fact, when they try to do it, as in Sri Lanka, in that story, they can make things worse. But the irony is, especially the United States, the attitude among citizens typically is, when they think of a politician or a party, that what are you going to do for me or my interest? So what I was able to share with these folks from multiple counties in Florida was, we're not asking you to help us do anything, but we want to help you as our local government achieve your goals together. It's so, but I just find it beautiful, because while my sentiments are obviously popular people participation without, having to rely on external sources of leadership in government, the government is still an institution that is in reality exists. It's just that they can't control this. We don't want to let governments control this process. My main concern is that as things deteriorate with supply chain globally, that many governments in local regions may be forced to do this themselves. They may be forced to call them be the conveners, convening everybody. Hey, we need to grow more food because we're running out of food. I don't think we want that to happen because they don't know how to do it. So let's be proactive and let's step up and let's expand this idea to as many communities as we can. But I find that ironic that that we were offering to help them rather than them used to being, the citizens are saying, what are you going to do for me?
Yeah,
Anyway,
you can tell that was that they were, because that was the question. How can we help you? What are you doing? That forgot about that. There's one other thing that really stood out for me, Richard, that I found fascinating was when Richard was casting this vision of collaboration and coming together. The lady said something along the lines, this may not be word for word, but this whole collaboration thing, isn't that kind of woo-woo? And it was like just really seeing something that's, like I don't know if they'd lost faith in that idea. Do you remember that, Richard, that piece?
I do. And it really struck me as initially it was kind of defensive to have to, share why character and values and spiritual development is important in building community. Initially, I was feeling that way, but then I felt compassion. I felt compassion because our society and our governmental institutions have degraded so much that the fundamental agreed upon universal spiritual principles like the golden rule and compassion and sharing and unconditional love, which is supported by every faith religious tradition for 10,000 years of history, every spiritual, even atheists support all of this. And yet when it comes to integrating that with doing business, whether it's running a company, an organization, or a local government, it's somehow seen as, separate or optional or almost weird. And that just shows how much we've degenerated as a culture, those fundamental moral and spiritual principles that are universal. I'm not talking about, some book that taught something. I'm talking about cross-culturally religious, where we're all connected, where they talk about how we can connect with this power within ourselves and how we could then build community. That's seen as woo-woo just shows you also how spirituality and religion rightly is separate from politics, like in the United States. That is valid, but we haven't figured out how to integrate true spirituality, which is embodiment in action, in our behaviors. We don't know how to step up for that. We don't know how to celebrate that. We don't know how to do that. So we get into these cultural wars, which are orchestrated to divide us. And many of them are about spirituality and the separation between the secular and the religious and spiritual. There are plenty of examples, as we've shared, of how to integrate this all in one, where spirituality and community network development is cool. I mean, it's not a divisive thing at all. And Sri Lanka is one case, the Sarvodaya movement. These Polynesian and Oceania peoples have been doing it for thousands of years. This is not our idea. It's just this traditional idea of integrating spirituality into action and community has been replaced by an atomized consumer culture that really doesn't want us to integrate. It wants us to go the opposite. In order to make us more into avid consumers, we have to be divided amongst each other, and we have to be focusing on material pleasure only as a source of happiness. And attending that conference, again, not to belabor it, but it's heightened on my heart and on my mind, that was a real deal. These were like real indigenous leaders, like in the field of action, like the lady that built a network of 80,000 farmers and the other farmers networks. This is really happening. It's just been marginalized. And we need to help these types of networks. We need to take and learn from them. It's like a new thing. Anyway, that was a long answer to the question about the woo-woo comment, but I hope it addressed the depth of what we're trying to do, which is really integrate spiritual development as a good thing and as a normal thing. It's normal, like it's not a big deal. It's not religion. It's walk your talk. If you say you're practicing the golden rule from your church, if you say you believe in these spiritual ideals of like Jesus, love thy neighbor, then you can't hide behind that anymore.
Get busy.
You got to practice it, not just with your own people in your church, your Buddhist group, your synagogue, your temple, your whatever, wherever you come together with your people. Spirituality has to be practiced in bigger collectives beyond your comfortable tribe. So building symbiotic networks has the values and principles of Golden Rule 2.0 and the energy that brings as we make these connections. We're building a connective tissue, the symbiotic network, that is imbued with this spirit, with this energy. And as a result, what happens is, and what I've seen is, it's like miracles can happen. When you get to that place where you're coming from an authentic center of being and you're stepping into that place and you're opening your heart to connect the community and people respond to it. So it's not a woo-woo thing at all. It's the prime driver of community change, economic change, cultural change, political change in transforming this planet. I think it's the key.
Yes, sir. Okay, so I want to, Richard, I'm going to call a little audible. I don't know if you saw my note.
I think I really want to follow your guidance
okay.
on what you think we should do for the rest of the meeting. We have 16 minutes.
16 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll. We'd love to know your interest level, kind of what excites you and what you want to learn more about. We're going to open this up just to, we only have, let's say 14 minutes, and a few of us, we'd love to hear who you are, where you live at, and go ahead and share your interest level. And if you had a question, we'd love to hear it. We may not be able to answer all of the questions today, so I'll take note and we might follow up with you one-on-one. We have a much larger group. We talked about Marion up in DC. We also have a gentleman in Washington who has multiple restaurants, a restaurant association. He's doing work in Africa, so they will be watching the replay. Hello, everybody. And I would love, Amanda, do you mind starting first? And if it's okay, I'm gonna do a timer just so it's short and sweet.
Okay, my name is Amanda. I am in Southeast Iowa and continuing to introduce the idea to local farmers market people, anyone that I can speak to, that the idea of coming together and creating more food availability for everyone that is sustainable, that is not just corn and soybeans.
Richard, would you like to introduce your amazing wife? As you guys know, that where there's a strong man, there's a strong woman. So Marta, if you could go next after Richard, do you mind introducing her?
Yeah, I want to introduce Marta. And yeah, we actually moved to Hawaii last year, and we were living in Reno since Marta doesn't share her accomplishments. So she finished her master's in human and family development and then applied that to her art. Marta's from Germany, but was born in Poland. And we actually live part-time in Europe. And anyway, so Marta's right now navigating, continue to develop herself as an artist and also be involved in these meetings here in Oahu and helping us get this together. So
thank you, Richard. Thanks. So I'm really interested in building a neighbors for neighbors network here. We moved to our neighborhood in July. So I've been starting just connecting to the neighbors, going on walks, meeting real amazing champions in the neighborhood, and yeah, I think that's a great way for me to start to get connected to the community by really reaching out first to the neighbors and yeah, our family here on Oahu. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Debbie, do you mind going next?
Not at all. Not at all. I'm into the whole network thing rather than the neighbor to neighbor. But I am doing a potluck dinner for Thanksgiving. What I have noticed talking to my neighbors is most of them don't stay here. I'm in a very transient area and I start talking to somebody and next thing you know, oh no, we're going back home in a week or so. So it's different dynamics talking to the neighbors around here. Some of them are here just for 2 months. Some of them are here for 2 weeks and then you don't see them ever again. Some are, snowbirds. So it's interesting, the different dynamics that I'm hearing from everybody. Okay, I'm done.
Well, that's a great comment. I think the key at the level of a street and a neighborhood is to identify those that are more stable and those that are more amenable as neighbor connectors. So all of these processes, whether it's building a larger, like a food system network, or it's even building a neighborhood connector team, it still involves a team. So I would just suggest maybe focus on identifying those that are more stable and have the right attitude and start getting to know them, and you'll build a core. See, all this has to do with energy and resonance and alignment of intention and how communities get built. Communities are found, the foundation of community is relationship that's ongoing and it's face to face. When that happens, you're building like the nucleus, like a seed, right? And then it can be planted and germinate. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and that's a challenge for many neighborhoods. So I think just focus on building your team, even if it's one or two other people. Get to know them and then start connecting from there, and then it'll expand out. I mean, it took me 3 years of annual activity. Like I was doing like a singular event in Reno, and the first year I had like 3 people, and then the next year I had like I think it was like 12, and the next year I had like 25. Those things take time, because think about it, we're in a culture of separation, and even at the street level, everybody generally just thinks about themselves, their families, their own kind of slice of life. In a sense, that's the purpose of like some neighborhoods, like suburban neighborhoods, is a garage that you go into. You don't have to interact with your neighborhood at all, or your neighbors at all. So we've degenerated, but we don't know it. We've degenerated in terms of our connectivity, but that's part of a plan to get us to comply with this bigger picture of this kind of global order that's building. So the way to deal with it, the only way I can see, the most revolutionary act, is to cultivate this golden rule 2.0, whatever you want to call it, and start building the seeds of this new culture, the culture that you want to live. You don't have to wait till the planet is like that as a whole. You could start that inside, then with one neighbor, Debbie. That would be really cool. That's like the next step. And these
I've
things
got 2 neighbors helping. I've
well,
already
there you
got,
go.
yeah,
So
I've got
pretty
2
good
neighbors
at-
helping.
So
Yeah.
you might consider bringing them together, other than the potluck, maybe,
Yeah.
call a meeting of neighbor connectors, and then talk about, their, like, you get to learn more about them. If you know them already, then it's, find out about the neighborhood itself, the history. I'm not talking about crime, like if you were like Neighborhood Watch or Next Door, where they're focusing on safety. I'm talking about, like our neighbor in Reno, she was there for like 40 years. In fact, her son lived in our house before we were there and bought it. It was so interesting. Through her, she connected us to the neighbor across the street that was really into planting, and backyard farming. So anyway, those are some thoughts.
Thank you.
Do you mind going next?
Sure. Good to meet everyone. This will be my first meeting. I spoke with Richard. I think we connected on Twitter, and we had an interesting share of ideas. I'm based out of just outside of Denver, Colorado, right at the kind of front range of the Rocky Mountains. I am a technologist, I guess, by trade, but I am interested kind of more from a tool building perspective, thinking about how we can build I would say more the bioregional level, bridging towns and cities, how we can create more structures that allow us to give, whether that's giving food or clothing or money, or even housing could be a possibility. The structure that I'm looking at building is largely around trusts, like legal trusts as an accounting and economic membrane, I would say. Richard, I shared a little bit. I like the storytelling element too, and I think the seed is a really interesting and compelling way to think about a trust, because it has a membrane that is largely in service of growth and in service of community relationships. Because what we grow together through the seed is then shared locally. So
that's really
yeah, that's how I'm coming in. There's some things I'm working on that are proximate to this discussion, but I'm really excited about building regional food networks that allow people to feed themselves and feed their community, because we have a very significant capacity of agriculture, yet somehow all mouths don't find food. So
just a quick response. That's really awesome, Todd, that you're building tech. In parallel, what we've been discussing in the last meetings is the disconnect between, especially the Web3 tech, who are trying to build networks to support bioregional development, and the actual people on the ground, like us, who are actually building the trust networks face to face. So the idea is that we've expressed in a couple meetings is that if you can keep in mind, if you find technologists that are building platforms that want to emulate, or they want to mimic what's happening in real communities, that's what we really need. we need to find and evolve tech. The technology has to follow the in real life connections. In other words, the way that we're building and connecting neighborhoods, the way that we're building these food system networks, in terms of all the tasks that requires communication, collaboration, coordination, some project management, those kinds of things. Currently, there doesn't seem to be one tech that kind of that supports that. For example, we're looking at using in the interim Discord, but maybe that's something we can talk about offline. Anyway, those are some of the thoughts would be, as these networks build, they'll need a digital capacity. And right now we have to use cobbled tools, whether it's a Facebook group, Discord channel, using Monday as a project management tool. Nothing really exists yet to help building a bioregional superorganism that connects everybody doing good work projects, let alone a planetary superorganism at this greatest level. So, but thank you, Todd, for what you're doing.
Thanks. I'll share one last reflection quickly. I thought the story about how we as humans can be rivers is very interesting, because it's really rivers that connect bioregions, and it's the water systems in nature that flow all around the world and have no respect for state border and country border, and it is really something that we share as humanity with the rest of nature. So I'll offer that as a closing thought.
Beautiful. I'm going to ask Kiva to go next. Kiva, you and Todd may be neighbors, and there might be some things to connect about. Are you okay sharing? You're muted, by the way. And then I'll have Dorothy, and then I think we're almost done. We'll have.
Yeah, I've listened. Like, it all sounds absolutely awesome. Todd, you're north of me. I'm down in Austin, Texas. I was in Boulder, Colorado at one point in time for a couple of years, so I know the area. I've got a business partner in Crested Boot as well, so it'd be good for us to connect on some level. And I also wanted to look at building a hub for something else, which would buy into this, but. The only thing I really look at from what we've spoken about is, yeah, it's great to have your head in the clouds. You have to have your feet on the ground. So when someone's saying this is like it's woo-woo and everything else, I think everyone's in a big hurry. So the idea of having your feet on the ground is, yes, you have to overcome discouragement when you're going through this process. It's going to take time, slow down to speed up. You are looking at individual connection to build trust. So yes, when you're with the person you're with, you're really trying to connect. You're the one holding the space to allow awareness to, grow. And then from that, it's bringing that network together and you're demonstrating by holding space. You have to hold that space. So start small, your skills will develop. I think and that's it. It's like, it's a process.
Thank you. I'm so excited for us to all get on the phone together. Anthony, do you want to share real quick, and then we'll have Nigel, and then we'll wrap it up?
Well, I am interested in the mapping project in our county and doing some of that networking with you. And I'm very interested in trying to figure a way through us speaking together of somehow integrating what you all are doing and what I've been involved in, because of all those people that we want to bring to this, because they're all like-minded, and also to share some of the things that may get in our way doing this process, because we're talking about governments and all that, and a lot of that is what's changing now because of the efforts, and it's phenomenal. But there's an awareness that has to be brought to the table, right, and an understanding, and then somehow or another it'll just come together. And so that's what I'm interested in doing with you all.
Beautiful. Nigel, you want to share quickly?
Yes, I'm on the Big Island with my partner, and we're just gradually chipping away like Amanda is in her location, farmers markets and other groups around the island, and just gradually seeing where there are commonalities. And I'd love to connect with Richard and see who some of these young people that he's already connected with on the Big Island, and get more and more meetings happening with involved a few groups concerning that. But just, as a few others us have said, it's holding a vision and feeling it in your heart and just chipping away at where your expertise is without dogma to any other groups, and seeing where you can make the biggest inroads by seeing it and feeling it and allowing that to happen and occur in its own way, with that vision held within your own heart, and keeping that going. As Richard was saying with us all, about 3/4 of an hour ago, like in the Hawaiian Islands, 90% of the food gets brought in by shipping companies like Matson, and we're very beholden to that. We've just got to get on with other ways of getting around that quixotically, so that we have sovereignty in food and food sovereignty on these islands. And how we go about that is just by finding like-minded people with big open hearts to accomplish that dream.
Nigel, Marta and I are going to Big Island on the 29th. We'll be in Hilo for first 2 nights, and we'll be in Hilo first 2 nights, and then North Kohala. So hopefully we can actually meet.
Yeah, that'd be great, Richard. Yeah, I think it's gradually coming together. These islands. There's been I'd love to meet up with you, Richard. Yeah,
sounds good.
That'd be really wonderful. Yeah.
I did want to share the link to, real quick, Richard, to what we've built as part of our mapping so that you guys can utilize this and copy it. This was the first step, was to start creating this database. But I'm going to share this with you, and all you have to do is just hit copy, and then you have the basic infrastructure of what Richard had suggested in all of the training. So this is where we've started to identify the producers and the consumers, and pulling it together. So if you just want to copy this and have the template so that you can start your area, this helps Richard as he comes in and guides you to have this step in place. And for us, we're, Debbie and I are constantly adding things to it. So I'll share that now. Richard, did you want to say any closing remarks?
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Shannon. The thing I'd like to say is that it's not like we have to do anything, like create any new projects, or it's not like there's really new ideas, maybe a new frame, but the ingredients for a new world civilization literally is in every neighborhood and every bioregion, every community. Like right now, the ingredients are there. The people that are emerging out of this kind of, I don't know, sense that I guess you could call it like a matrix, like they're literally aware that something's been happening, and that the way things are going is not heading in a direction that's going to be good for anybody. So there's more people like that. So their allies are there. The art of this is to have this kind of gentle framework in order to connect people without it itself becoming a silo or reproducing dominance or trying to control people, by branding some franchise. That's not what this is about. This is about true helping communities to empower themselves. Really, for me, it's about true liberation, about freedom. But freedom doesn't mean free just to do whatever you feel like doing. That's not what real freedom is. Freedom is realizing our connectivity and our connections to others, and voluntarily just desiring to share. So no coercion, nobody telling you what to do. I'm so excited that I see this already happening. What we're doing is just providing a gentle scaffolding. We're not building the building. This is scaffolding to get us from where we are as a society in the way it's structured to this next world civilization. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, or, like, what's this economy going to be like and all that. I think we need to just focus right now on the scaffolding. How do we connect all the players who are divided now so that they can now start to work together and build and accelerate those solutions? I'm really optimistic about that. And it's one of those neck and neck things, as we're building up this, the old system is in challenge, wars and economic crises, inflation, food security, all those things. And it's important to know about those things, but ultimately, nose to the grindstone, like where you're at, make it real. I think that's what we're all trying to do, and support each other and share what we're learning so we can accelerate it. And then once again, thank you, everybody.